Okay, great. I think we'll go ahead and get started. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar hosted by the Mekong Club alongside the release of the latest publication From Fake Job Ads to Human Trafficking, the horrifying reality of the human trafficking scam trade. Produced in collaboration with Humanity Research Consultancy, the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative, and the Knoble. I'm Valentina Kasuli from Humanity Research Consultancy, HRC. We are a UK-based social enterprise that focuses on counter-trafficking, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all here today. I'll be the moderator for today's session, so I'll just begin with a 10-minute presentation to give everyone a background on this crime. Then we'll move on to a panel discussion where I'll pose questions to our experts, and everyone in the audience, feel free to put any questions in the chat, or if you feel like you can contribute to the questions, that is also fine. And just to let everyone know, the webinar will be recorded and it will be sent out to everyone who registered for the event after the event has finished. So, as I'm sure you're all aware, online scams have become an increasing issue over the last few decades. And as technology is advancing, so too are the scams, resulting in an unprecedented rise in cryptocurrency scams over the past few years. According to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, over $10 billion were lost to internet scams in 2022 alone. And with many of the scams going unreported, this figure is likely to be much higher. One of the commonly known scams is the pig butchering scam. I imagine the majority of you here today will have probably received messages from strangers innocently framed as being sent to the wrong number. This could have been an attempt to start a pig butchering scam, whereby the scammer builds up a trusting, even loving relationship with the target before convincing them to invest into a fake investment website or platform, and then they proceed to freeze their wallets and drain their funds. However, the pig butchering scam and many other types of online scams are often a double-edged sword with victims on both ends. And just a warning, there is a triggering image on the next slide. Since last year, we have witnessed a rise in the new form of human trafficking, fueling online scams, whereby victims are lured into compounds across Southeast Asia, commonly in Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and the Philippines. These individuals are then forced to scam others from across the globe, and they'll often be beaten, electrocuted, or face other methods of torture if they refuse to comply or perform badly in their scamming operations. The victims come from a range of backgrounds, many being English-speaking professionals and students educated to degree level. Currently, we've identified victims from over 20 different countries, including China, the US, Brazil, Ethiopia, Russia, and the UK. And the list of victim-sending countries is ever increasing. In fact, this map that on the screen is actually already outdated. Many of the victims are lured in through fake job advertisements on platforms such as Facebook, WhatsApp, and Telegram, or they'll be recommended the job by a friend or a relative. Some do go voluntarily to conduct the scams, but once they are there, they're often held against their will and face the same violence. Victims in the compounds are given numerous mobile phones and computers to be used for the scamming, as well as a script put together using psychological tactics to entice the scam targets. Victims are sold between the different companies that operate within the compounds, often for upwards of $1,000. And there have also been reports of victims being sold with USDT, a digital currency. On the screen here, you can see screenshots from open Telegram group chats used to buy and sell human beings, or put out bounties for people who have escaped from the compounds, and to share scam scripts and tactics, such as how to brainwash, how to build trust, and the manipulative conversation tactics for female targets. As the publication will demonstrate, technology is leveraged in multiple ways to allow the criminals to evade detection. Within the compounds, this includes the use of international internet cables, and the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative, who we have with us today, conducted a geofencing operation to identify the location of IP addresses surrounding the compounds. Here we have a map of a compound in Myanmar, where it was discovered that the majority of the IP addresses were actually located in Thailand. VPNs are also used along with other means to mass detection. Throughout the scams, deepfake is often used to deceive targets, along with other forms of AI. Financial flows are also easily hidden and diverted with the use of technology, and our panel discussion today, as well as the publication itself, will allow us to hear from the experts themselves on this. As we can see, this crime is a complex issue impacting millions of people across the globe. And behind the losses of these scams that are now in the billions of dollars are real people who are suffering daily, even facing death. With such a complex issue, a collaborative response is needed between law enforcement, survivors, NGOs, governments, private sector, finance, and the tech industry. Today, our panel will provide the latest updates on this crime and a discussion on the potential means for combating this fast-growing issue. Thank you. I'll now go ahead and introduce our panel today. Firstly, we have Matt Freeman of the Mekong Club. He's an international human trafficking expert with more than 35 years experience. And the Mekong Club is an organization of Hong Kong's leading businesses which have joined forces to help end all forms of modern slavery. Matt previously worked for USAID and the United Nations in over 40 countries and offers technical advice to numerous governments, banks, and corporations working to eliminate all forms of modern slavery, and is also the author of 12 books. In 2017, Matthew also won Asia's prestigious Communicator of the Year Gold Award. Next, we have Mina Chang, founder and director of Humanity Research Consultancy, HRC. HRC is an award-winning UK-based social enterprise revolutionizing the fight against modern slavery and human trafficking. With research experience in modern slavery, forced labor, and human rights issues across a wide range of UN bodies, governments, and NGOs, Mina is becoming a sought-after expert, especially for her expertise in countering forced labor in the scamming compounds in Southeast Asia and forced labor in the fishing industry. And Mina has been invited to contribute her expertise to over 20 media platforms. Mina has consulted in some of the world's poorest and most conflict-affected countries and is a peer-reviewed college at the UK Modern Slavery and Human Rights Policy and Evidence Centre. Next, we have Ian Mitchell. Ian Mitchell is a 25-year global fraud fighter and founder of the Knoble, a non-profit with the mission to unite the financial crimes industry to protect vulnerable populations and fight human crimes, such as trafficking, scams, child exploitation, and elder abuse. Ian is also the co-founder of Mission Omega, mission-driven fraud services company that helps the financial industry enhance anti-fraud programs, defenses, and controls. Ian is also a singer-songwriter who regularly shares his passion for living a life of purpose through music, speaking, and advocating for the fight against human crime and fraud. Next, we have Larry Cameron. Larry has 20 plus years experience in the technology and cybersecurity industry. He's the Chief Information Security Officer at the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative, which combats global human trafficking by promoting corporate social responsibility through increasing awareness, facilitating intelligence integration and technology advancement, and encouraging strategic data collaboration. Larry is also the co-founder of the Anti-Human Trafficking Cryptocurrency Consortium, an OSINT investigator and team lead blockchain forensics for the National Child Protection Task Force, a senior judge for Tracelab's Missing Person Capture the Flag, the head of cybersecurity for the Cyber Rights Organization, and a professor of computer forensics and cloud security at St. Lawrence College. As well as this, he's a certified digital evidence investigator, mobile device investigator, triage investigator, certified cryptocurrency investigator, and holds 65 industry, IT, and security certifications. He manages all things technology and security focus for ATII and is bridging the gap for using technology for good to combat human trafficking and child exploitation. Thank you very much. I will now open the floor to our panel discussion. So this is a question for all our panelists. Now that we have had an overview of this crime, what are the factors that you think are contributing to the rise of human trafficking scam trade from both a technical technology standpoint and also a counter-trafficking standpoint?
I'm happy to start off with that one. Actually, COVID was a major contributing factor to this taking off. You had a lot of criminals that weren't able to move around. People weren't able to enter into the casinos in Cambodia and so forth. And as a result of that, they came to realize that if you kind of just give people scamming information, every 10th person is going to give you some money. When they realized that that was fairly lucrative, they moved the infrastructure into allowing for the scam centers to be set up, and then they started to do the human trafficking to the scam centers. Now that the model is out there that you can have human trafficking into scam centers, the issue and the problem is that there's a lot of people around the world that are seeing this as a viable criminal activity, and the concern is that this will proliferate as a result of that.
And I could add from a financial perspective, in addition to what Matt was talking about, I think the risk of fraud on the increase, the business of committing fraud has been growing exponentially for decades now. A lot of financial institutions and organizations have put a lot of defenses in to fight fraud like identity theft and counterfeit. And so what's happened is during COVID and the mass amount of monies that were given by various governments to help assist kind of their citizens, there was a plethora of information or money that was available, and the fraudsters learned to go after what we call the weakest link. Basically, because of all the defenses that banks and other financial institutions have put in, it was easier that fraudsters have learned it's easier to convince people like us, everybody on the phone here, we're all vulnerable, especially in the pandemic of loneliness that's been going on around the world. We're all vulnerable. So a lot of times, well, at least the fraudsters have found that it's easier to go after the customer of the financial institution or the citizen versus the financial institutions themselves because of all the money and investments that's been put in. So I love to say, and I say that scams is probably the biggest financial crime problem we have in the world today outside of pig butchering because of the money muling that's going on and the vast amount of money and the different advancements in the way money has been moved, the person-to-person payments, small dollar payments, real-time settlement, all these kind of constructs that now exist globally have made the business of scams very attractive. And I think that's what we're seeing here is these criminal organizations are trying to find a way to scale and to grow this enterprise. And the pig butchering, the human trafficking is one way for them to grow and scale this business of scams and fraud.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Ian, for that. And with that, where do you think the priorities should lie at the moment? How can we effectively tackle this issue? Perhaps from a tech and finance standpoint, where do you think the priorities need to lie in tackling this issue?
Yeah, so maybe I can start off here just from the finance again and perspective, and this is just something that I do a lot of talking about, and there's a lot of attention on by global organizations and different financial institutions, is to build defenses around scams. It's a different type of defenses that are needed, and so the innovation around sharing information, the approach on training consumers and our populations to make the scam end of the problem less attractive and not as easy. So consumer education and trying to find a way to advance our treatment for if we suspect a scam, how do we convince somebody who believes that there's a romance, there's a person on the other end that cares about them, the grooming that happens with these scams, it's an emotional problem. And so trying to change our defenses and innovate and advance our defenses in the world of scams is going to be one end of the equation, because if we can make the scam business less attractive, not as easy, and make the general population of people, it makes the obviously business of abusing and enslaving people to commit those scams less attractive. So there is a whole effort underway right now globally in certain countries like the UK and Australia and a lot of other countries that are leading the way. But there's a lot of efforts by financial institutions globally to find a new way to put in, to advance their defenses and protect their customers and protect our citizens.
Great, thank you so much.
So maybe a bit. So I mean, when we think about any kind of crime, very easy, we ended up jumping into like the vulnerable populations, and lots of the solutions that people are discussing is very much about kind of preventing people beyond becoming more vulnerable. But in reality, the reason why any kind of crime can exist is because the perpetrators can stay with impunity, and that's why we are seeing very much for the criminal compounds. So they are able to not be punished by any kind of laws or persecutions, mainly because of 4 reasons. One is because it's very much out in the places that's really kind of corrupted. That's the first thing, that they usually get local authorities back up for what they are doing. The second thing is they can find places that are really isolated. So for example, lots of compounds that we know are mainly, for example, in Laos, in the Golden Triangle compound, which is their own kingdom, or for example in Myanmar, places that actually have a civil war. And then with a high-tech kind of situation that police cannot even catch the evolutions of the technology, then also criminals are very good in utilizing global. So they are able to, for example, having certain operations in one country and having other kind of money laundering in another country. So in terms of a solution, it's really important to actually think about how can we try to create more criminal accountabilities. If the local police is not trustworthy, can we use any kind of global sanction schemes, other kind of authorities that can create consequence to criminals' activities? Thank you.
If you would mind, could I build on what was just being said? I think it's exactly right on. And I think one of the things, at least I'm speaking from the financial institutions and banking and just experience that I've had in the countries that I've operated in, I do think that this is where anybody who's in the financial institution needs to assist law enforcement in this, because a lot of the ways that we attempt to prosecute these criminal rings, it's not sticking because it's lower crimes. And if we can, the financial institutions, and whether they're formal banking institutions or fintechs that are the alternative cryptocurrency organizations, as we can support law enforcement in these efforts, we can get some of these criminals on money laundering and fraud that have higher levels of criminal strength, and we can put these criminals away longer and more harsh. And I think that's one of the things. So I just encourage anybody who's in the financial sector, we need to do a better job of supporting and educating, helping our law enforcement counterparts, both locally and globally, as we try to take more severe action against these criminal rings.
Yeah, just to add a completely different perspective to this, and that is, on the prevention side, as people come to recognize and understand that this is a particular issue and it affects people, it makes a difference. For example, through social media in China, there has been so much kind of interplay among various people that don't go to Cambodia. If you go there, something bad could potentially happen and so forth, that it's resulted in a situation where a lot of people are aware of that situation. The same in Taiwan and Hong Kong and so forth. But what people don't recognize is that, well, maybe this started in Cambodia. We're seeing it now in many other countries as well. So the bottom line is, both for the scams and for human trafficking into scam centers, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And you should find a way of checking it out. And so the old days of just assuming that you could have a conversation with somebody who's interviewing you for a job and thinking that that's all okay, you can't even go by that anymore. Because some of the people who have been tricked and deceived into going to some of these countries went through a proper, job website. They actually had interviews. They were sent tickets when they got there. They had the expectation that something amazing was going to happen, only to be put into a van, taken to one of these scam centers, and then the horrible things happen as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I just want to, so with that, what could you explain a little bit more, perhaps for everyone, what role do the financial institutions and the private sector have in combating this crime? Because they're intricately involved in this, and maybe if you could just outline the due diligence that they have behind this and the pressure that needs to be put on them to actually take action. This isn't a far removed issue that they don't have to be involved in. This is something that they have the due diligence to actually act and prevent these crimes from going any further. So if one of the panelists would like to address that.
I'll start off with kind of the non-financial institutions. ever since this became an issue around 18 months ago, we, the Mekong Club, have been asked to do presentations to corporations. We go into the corporate offices and we spend 45 minutes, 50 minutes going into the same detail that you provided at the beginning in 10 minutes, because they are concerned about their people. They're concerned about their community. They want their employees to then go home and tell their family and networks and so forth. And so the private sector has the potential to disseminate the prevention messages. And I'll stop there and let Mina and Ian talk about other private sector things.
Yeah, I would say also, as I think what Ian also touched upon, like to kind of punish the criminals, put them behind the bars are not necessarily always the most effective. In fact, actually, lots of criminals, they go into jail and they come out as a criminal. However, if you are able to target people's money, which is confiscating their assets, asset freezings, these are all methods that will be much more effective. And yeah, so if you're in the banking systems and you are able to actually, be very careful about all the kind of stakeholders. For example, we heard about some criminals, they even have, let's say, tigers and lions as their pets. And they have, for example, luxury products around the world. And for example, Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen, his nephews and nieces, they are all living a luxury life around the world. Those kind of like stakeholders, we already very much know who they are and their relatives. And there's a whole list of actors. They are, published by different kind of organizations. Some of them even have a charitable front of them, owning like a multiple company. So if you are able to, for example, be very much aware about those people can be potentially having risk, and able to do the proper due diligence, that can be a good starting point.
And I would add, not to oversimplify or dehumanize it in the supply and demand of this problem. We have to enhance, as I mentioned before, our scam defenses, and we need regulators involved, the governments involved. We need innovation and technology companies to look at information sharing. We have to rethink how we fight this fraud, because the duping, the end customer is one being duped into committing the scam. So if we can remove that demand side, I think we then can focus our efforts on identifying these scam centers that we're talking about and putting our defenses on trying to minimize the vulnerability of the actual person that's being duped into coming or tricked into being a victim of trafficking. And I think that's going to take something far larger and far greater. I do want to encourage, we have a lot to do on the financial institution side, and we're just at the beginning. But it's interesting, I came back from a meeting with the United Nations on child sexual exploitation, and I learned so much about how the technology companies need to play a role in this. And some of them are stepping up, but a lot of them, as my understanding, haven't yet. And so we need some of the major technology companies and internet service providers and search engine providers. And there's a convergence, an intersection of all these crimes. And so we need the social media platforms. There's some of them that have done a lot on this, but we need more done. So I do think that there needs to be more organizations involved. And I think this is what the issue is, at least one of them. And this is what Matt, I've known Matt for years now, Matt Friedman, and he's continues to reinforce. Part of it is just knowledge and understanding. It's the awareness. And there are so many great people, like presidents of banks that I've recently met, that didn't know that they could do something to fight human trafficking at banks. I think there's a lot of good people in organizations all around the world. And again, there are bad people, but there's a lot of good people that they just don't have an awareness of this problem. And I think organizations like the ones on the phone here, platforms like the ones that we just need to expand the awareness and then help make the connection for everyone that's in these companies on understanding how they can be a part of the solution. I think that's one of the biggest problems we have, is making that connection, increasing awareness, and helping to everyone to connect that they have an opportunity to make an impact no matter where they work, if it's hospitality or technology or other sectors.
Yeah, I want to add kind of two things to this. Here in Asia, we have the Asia Pacific Banks Alliance, which is a group that has started to meet on a every other month or quarterly basis. In the North American Banking Alliance, the Knoble's involved in that as well, in order to basically get banks involved in this, to get their recommendations related to typologies, processes, procedures, the identification of red flag indicators, how to kind of apply this to big data and so forth. But there's one other aspect that I want to kind of mention related to this. And I've been associated with addressing human trafficking for over 35 years, and this is the closest that I've seen to actually trafficking being terrorism. When you see what actually happens to these individuals within these centers, the tortures, the tasering, and on Telegram, you also have websites that have the torture on there, and they basically say, if you want more, you can pay to get the good stuff, where they actually torture and kill people. And so this is called harmcore. It's an entirely new form of, I don't know what you even call this, but a titillation for people who are somehow drawn to that type of thing. And it's the same type of thing we saw with ISIS in the Middle East, where they had the beheadings and the killings and everything else. This is a form of terrorism. If we were able to kind of move the legislation in the direction that would allow for banks and financial institutions to be able to share more information like they have with terrorism, you'd have an opportunity for there to be a much more assertive and aggressive approach associated with this. The one Telegram site that I saw recently had 20,000 followers, and it had 60 depictions of torture on there, and it was right out in the open. Not in the dark web, it's right out in the open for anyone to see.
Yeah, it seems it's the fact that there's so many Telegram groups that are just very openly, anyone can open them on their phone or on their laptop and see exactly what the criminals are doing. It seems almost too insane to be true, but it is. And so with that, there's a question from the audience. Is there any more we can do to inform the banks and the private sector about this crime? Because I know as a panel, obviously we all know a lot about this crime, but it seems that perhaps the private sector are still learning about it. What can we do to actually increase the awareness within this within that sector and push for more affirmative action?
Yeah, okay. Maybe Matt, you go first?
No, you go first, Mina, please.
Okay, so I think there are two things. One is that, of course, joining this kind of event, that's great. But if you do want to kind of formalize more detailed action plans, it would be good to actually have something a bit kind of substantial. And I think another thing is to really be learning about criminal tactics in terms of money laundering. So like, for example, nowadays we are seeing casinos being used as a central point, and there are several casinos already being identified, and they have their own Telegram groups talking about how they're laundering monies, and lots of people who are doing that for them. There's also other kind of methods going, for example, like moving the blocks, banjuan, or for example, like a power fan, like a kind of running the bits. So there are several different kind of laundering, money laundering methods, and there are also a lot that's changing between, for example, USDT, the cryptocurrencies, and fiat money into, for example, Thai bahts or other like local Southeast Asian currencies. So we are seeing a lot of that. And the other thing is, for banking systems, your side, once you are able to actually understand how criminals are utilizing all these different methods, there can be a potential way for you to actually identify solutions. The other thing is we are seeing more and more persecutions nowadays coming up, including, for example, Taiwanese governments, Cambodian government did a bit as well. There are several Asian governments that are starting to persecute criminals, and many of the time they actually do struggle to actually understand the financial flow, but they have people in their hand. That's a time actually a good opportunity for you to collaborate together with the law enforcement parties and trying to work together on identifying ways that they may potentially harm your banking system. I will stop here.
Yeah, I mean, I one of the things that we've used effectively in addressing human trafficking are these 3 to 5 minute kind of info promotional, cartoonish type e-learning videos that can be visually helping a person to understand what the material is, but it could also be put into multiple languages. And so it's not enough just to have this in English. You need it in Mandarin, Cantonese, Thai, Burmese, and so forth. And you could have a video that focuses on how to prevent getting scammed into a scam center, how to prevent, getting involved in scams, what is the issue, and so forth. 2 or 3 of these constitutes kind of a e-learning curriculum. And as a result of that, this would allow for the dissemination of this through emails and social networking and websites to be a lot more standardized and effective. You did a great job, Valentina, in summarizing what the issue was, and you did it in about 8 minutes. These videos can do the same for financial institutions.
And I would add, just to build on the points that were made, I think all the organizations on here, ATIIs on here, also have some amazing strategies on how to increase awareness. And so I do think supporting organizations like the ones that represent on the phone is important. But I think one of it comes down to just communication. And so what Matt's talked about is important. But I think there's an understanding. It feels like a professional. I think a lot of what I find is they want to leave it up to experts like Matt Friedman and Mina to be the ones communicating. But I think one of the things that I've learned, and not being a longtime human crime fighter, is you don't have to be an expert to care and to ask questions. And so when I look to organizations, one of the things I always talk about is, a lot of organizations that are represented on the phone have third-party suppliers. Ask the third-party supplier what they do to fight human crime. Start having basic conversations in your vernacular. I think there's a lot we can do at the CEO level, at the government level. We have to get there. But there's a lot of we can do at the individual level, at an analyst and a manager, on how we change the way we do business to start caring about things like the human crimes we're talking about here, scams. It's going to take all of us to have community conversations with those in our family, educating them, making sure they're aware of scam issues and sextortion issues. But it's also going to take us within our corporate environments to start having conversations with those around us about pig butchering, for example. We don't have to, again, be experts to actually have very meaningful impact. So I think it's a groundswell both at the top and at the bottom that we're going to have to go and attack this. The scam for this particular issue, we have to fight this scam problem. We have to advance our defenses. We have to increase and enhance our communication and our education, because old ways of doing this aren't working. So we have to use science and understand human psychology when we start interacting with potential victims. Again, on the demand side, there's a lot we need to do to advance just our fight on scams, like I've said before.
And if we don't draw a line in the sand now and do this, it's going to continue to proliferate. I started just seeing Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar. Now it's Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Dubai, it's Ghana, it's several other places in Africa. Mexico had an article that came out. You have this great model of criminal activity. You get a person, you put them in a chair, you force them to scam, and it's like having an ATM machine. They just deliver. And some of the minimum amounts that a person needs to scam and get each day to avoid the beatings and the tortures, like $14,000 US. You do that times 10,000 of people, and you're really talking about a tremendous amount of money that we can, from the standpoint of money laundering, be also looking at this, because that money has to eventually be put into legitimate systems and procedures. There's an entire set of potential typologies that could be developed to figure out how are they taking their laundered money, the crypto money that's turned into regular money, and money laundering it.
We have a model that we've used in banking, whether fighting money laundering or fraud, that works. And I think it's us to, on the scam side, is to start not thinking that we can't do this. We can, and we've proven that we can. Scams is going to grow to be 30 to 60% of the total fraud losses for a financial institution. It's a huge amount of money that we need to start carrying and advance our programs and our infrastructure, even before regulation is even forcing us to do this. And I think that's one of the things a lot of banks default to. Well, there's no regulation requiring me to do this. And I think there's a human element here. This human crime is enough reason for us to advance our programs.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
Maybe add a little bit in terms of transactions between criminals. Nowadays, it is a bit hard because mainly it's in cryptocurrencies. Lots of transactions, for example, buy and sell human beings, or for example, like how they scan the money from the victims. Very often is through crypto, which traditional bank can be a bit hard for you to do anything. However, criminals, they always ultimately have to launder their money back to fiat currency, almost always. So what we are seeing is, for example, something called one of the laundering methods, which is called like 车队, like how you have kind of like a series of cars, they call it cars, but basically it's lots of bank accounts that you can watch the money, you send to account A, and then A to B, B to C, C to D. So through that process, then you kind of make it difficult. But then if you see that kind of a transaction patterns, again, there can be a conversation a bit like deeper, but there will be ways that you can try to find out like, why is it like this, and like what are the kind of red flags for those kind of transactions. There will be specific amount of money, there will be specific patterns at doing that. So these are things that potentially banks can start doing.
I mean, I have to just add, so just I think about all the defenses we have for fighting credit card fraud. It's risk scoring aggregation points of money. This is, again, we have a model that we've done this before. It's applying it to this new circumstance. I mean, I can't say yes and amen to what you said, even more than because I think this is where we think we have to invent something new. And actually, we have the ability to look at this. And I love the point you made about it coming back to fiat currency. This is where we can work together in a global scale and look at the aggregation of risk points. And this won't just be fighting the problems we have today, but it's also going to help us fight traditional fraud and money laundering and other types of crimes that are financially motivated if we get better at doing this consortium type view and risk scoring view. So I think you're right on.
Yeah, so as it's very clear that as the technology is advancing, it's just flowing over into these scams, and that's why they're able to just proliferate in such a rapid way and go undetected by law enforcement. So how can law enforcement work with tech companies to use this advancement in technology in their favor to actually counter this crime?
You know, the one thing that we're beginning to see used on a regular basis is AI for the criminals. You know, they're basically using ChatGPT and other mechanisms to replicate websites that allow them to have the back door and so forth. I think we need to use AI for good. AI has the potential to really kind of identify all kinds of patterns and so forth. You know, this is one of those times when I just wish there was somebody on this this call that was influential enough to be able to tap into a world that has these smart, capable, you know, investigative type individuals that know how to go into the deep web and how to use AI and so forth to just be as organized as the criminals. Organized crime is organized. You know, despite what people think, you know, there are a lot of individuals that are hired at huge amounts of money to come in and set up the infrastructure and the software and everything for these centers, because some of these communities have 25, 30,000 people in a walled facility with 5, 6, 7, 10-story buildings completely filled with people. There has to be people within that are managing the computers and the engineering and everything else. We need the same type of people on the good guy side to be counteracting that type of situation.
And I think from my perspective, those people exist, so many of them in financial services. They're applying themselves in areas that there's a clear return on investment on financial loss. And so it's taking some of those technologies we're using and advancing, and we need to advance them. The other thing is, I think is a fear by financial institutions, right or wrong, from advanced information sharing in certain aspects, not all aspects. We do this in credit risk and fraud risk, but in certain aspects like these, because of fear of regulatory I don't know, harm that's going to cause, it's a wrong word, but regulatory coming down from regulators on that type of innovation that's maybe a little bit off page, a little bit more experimental. And it's my understanding just in conversations that regulators are encouraging the use of advanced analytics and machine learning and exploring AI in the right application, doing it responsibly. But I think that governments and examiners can help, regulators can help this innovation in this sector, in this space of protecting human beings. I think there's an opportunity for us to release some of the concern in the financial institution space to utilize some of these advanced technologies, Matt, that you're talking about. I think it's absolutely needed. It's there. The best people, the best data, best technologies, I'm going to argue, some of them are in the financial sector.
Yeah, I would also add a little bit about just to illustrate what other people that we are fighting. So for example, some of the victims who were in the scamming compounds, they told me how when they were in the scamming compound, they're not just being forced to conduct scam, but also to write codings and to kind of make the scam methods better and better. So for example, let's say because you need to use a certain kind of Google phones to contact some random people in America, but of course if you send lots of messages, your account is going to be blocked. So he was being forced to kind of upgrade this kind of system to make it less likely to be blocked and more easier to be doing more scans. So I'm just giving examples of what kind of people the scamming compound are having and what kind of skills they may have. Because for example, I think we also mentioned that deepfake, for example, is being used directly in terms of scamming victims. You have people you think you're having videos who is actually another person's face, and also not just about that, but like scammers, because it's about money. I mean, the criminals are chasing after money, and because this is so lucrative in a way that billion is even very conservative. Some of our other friends we were talking about, they can be actually even bigger than that. And lots of other industries that's around that is emerging. So scam is kind of the center, but then you can see, for example, the money laundering side, that becomes another lucrative. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. So for example, I'm going to show some images as well, but this is on the media, Taiwanese media. The reason why these people are being held like this is not because they are being forced to do scam, but because their bank accounts are being utilized by criminals. So the criminals hold them safe and hold all their bank accounts to conduct money laundering activities. We also see similar things of previous scammers who are in the Filipino jails ended up starting to kind of designing and crafting murders and door breaking in Japan. So they are Japanese criminals doing scam and then therefore being held in the jail in Philippines, but then able to use telegrams and use our social media to control their teams to do things in Japan. So the thing is, once you start doing scam, you have lots of personal data. Those personal data can easily be utilized for other purposes. So it is actually really alarming, and lots of things we are seeing like popping up around this kind of criminal activities.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of, again, project the potential of this in the future. I'm not going to mention the specific countries, but the amount of money that's generated from these scam centers and these scam compound environments is so excessive that it almost becomes a disincentive to do anything about it because so many people are being paid off. The possibility of this then destabilizing, rule of law and human rights movements and so forth is very much available as a part of this. And so for the first time, you have these potential islands that are insulated that have so much cash that they can really influence the direction of protecting this system and procedure from being in place. We don't want the world to be moving in that direction, but that's exactly the direction we see this going in right now.
Yeah, and with that, so just where do you see this going if action isn't taken? It's already been on, just for HRC's case, just 1 year since we first discovered this crime, and it's already multiplied tenfold, so in the future, if action isn't taken, where do you think this is going to go from a human trafficking standpoint and also from a scamming standpoint as well?
I'm going to start off with this. I've been focusing on the issue of trafficking for 35 years. I've been intimately involved in helping to address sex trafficking, forced labor, every type of trafficking you could possibly imagine. This is the first time that I'm really, really frightened about something exploding in the direction of having a devastating impact on the world, because you have these two elements. You have human trafficking into scam centers, and then you have the scams as well. And they feed off each other. The more money you generate, the more possibility there is for more human trafficking to take place. I almost feel like this is a DEFCON 5 red light blinking scenario at present, because it's proliferating without enough of a global infrastructure or a combined set of actions in place to be able to respond to it. It just feels like that, it's going to be years from now until we get the coordination going. The reason why we do these webinars is to basically say to people, we really need to be taking this seriously now. And I worked in over 40 countries in the world. This is the first time that I'm really feeling like we are in a situation that if we don't address this soon, we're going to have a real problem that is going to get out of control. I don't know if the other panelists feel the same way, but this is beyond what we generally do at the Mekong Club, but it's so relevant and important that we're really putting a lot of effort into this.
Yeah, so Mina, why don't you want to go? So in 2018-19, I had this hypothesis that fraud, we knew money laundering was a problem, but fraud was funding human trafficking. And I had a bunch of conversations with law enforcement agents, and they found a couple isolated cases, but sure, this is something that for years, I was showing these couple cases saying that, look, human trafficking fraud is leading to the funding of trafficking of human beings and drugs. And now we're seeing this face to face. It's not something that we need to find one agent with an example case where this is happening. And this fraud problem, scams are a type of fraud. A lot of banks don't have responsibility or liability for this type of fraud. scams, like I go back to, is the biggest financial crime problem we have. It will be the biggest fraud type that we have, if I can group it as one type, bigger than identity theft, bigger than all of card fraud. And it gets card fraud, and both of those get so many billions of dollars of innovation and technology supporting it. So with the size of the scam problem we have globally and the funding of evil things like it's doing, I do think this is a significant problem. But I will go back to the silver lining is, I know some of the best fraud fighters and financial crime fighters and law enforcement around the world are focused on the scam problem. So it's not that it's being ignored. The question is, we haven't connected it effectively to the human element. We connected to the scam event and the victim of the scam, but we haven't connected it fully to how is this being scaled and sourced, and we have to do that. And then it's not just a financial problem. We need the technology companies and the social media companies. We need to create a construct where people can work better at supporting law enforcement and better across countries and better across institutions to share information. And we can do this. We have a model. We can do this in a way that preserves privacy and is secure and uses technologies like tokenization. It exists. We have models that do this, but this is a major problem. If we don't innovate past this, to Matt's point, this will be the way that these evils are funded for decades and decades to come at scale with more money than they've ever seen, because we're all vulnerable. This isn't just an elderly person or a handicapped person or an uneducated person. These are the most educated, the most sophisticated. These are bankers. These are fraud fighters and financial. All of us are vulnerable at this point. And as long as it's lucrative, as long as there's a demand side, these scam centers will exist and they will scale and they will abuse people. And we need to work together across sectors to innovate and bring the best that we have to offer as good human beings into this fight, which I know we can.
Yeah, I will also add a bit on what Ian just said. So one of the victims that we saw from China, he's actually even a millionaire. He's a millionaire, but he was brought into the compound, beaten up, and he was forced to come back skin to that degree. And come back to the question about like what can we do? So I would say like to create wider accountability, it's really important. I will just give an example. This case I found it super kind of enlightening. So Lisa, the lady here, she was unfortunately sexually assaulted several years ago. But then what she did is not just to sue her abusers, but she actually sued the hotel because the hotel knew that she was inside, decided to do nothing, and then she successfully get a kind of settlement in the end. So my message is right now we are thinking about scammers or criminals inside, but they are actually more than that. So they are, for example, police stations right next to it, not doing anything, and we're just like how can we do? You're not doing anything, but they actually have a responsibility for doing nothing. How about those construction companies? You are building buildings that you know this is designed for torture. This is designed for certain purpose. There's lots of stakeholders that are around all this system because it's an industry. It's not just it's organized crime. It's not individual decide to do that. It's a whole organized situation. So I know, like for example, today's audience, majority of many of our audience are from the banking sector. It's impossible for you to make laws, but it's possible for you to, for example, review your code of conduct, review your policies, who you give money to, who you not give money to. Can you try to extend the accountabilities to people who you think may potentially link to what's happening here? Not just necessarily the scammers themselves or the criminals themselves, but try to think about the wider accountability.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm just going to open the floor now. We have just under 10 minutes left. So if anyone in the audience has any questions for our panelists, please feel free to unmute yourself or pop them in the chat if you'd like.
I can see we have quite a few in the chat already. So.
Okay, great. Let me. So one of the questions in the chat, is this on the radar of the US TIP and UNODC human trafficking assessments?
I know the JTIP in Washington knows about this, and they're actually requesting assistance on this. I know that there are many government agencies, the FBI, Homeland Security, financial regulators that have been exposed to it. I just kind of don't think that they quite understand the size and scale of it yet, though. And I think until that happens, there isn't going to be as much action as we need.
I do. I was in Vienna a couple weeks ago, and I had a conversation with somebody from the UN, and they said to me that this is bigger than we know it is at this point. So that's the one encouraging. I think we're all becoming aware. And so I do think it's raising up to the point. There are wonderful people, like somebody out of Santa Clara County, Aaron West, who's done a lot. There are a lot of people that are advocating in our voices, just like Mina and Matt and ATII, raising this to the level where it's getting attention. We just need to keep doing this. We're not there yet.
Thank you. And another one from Julie Poole. What are the main red flags that correspondent banks should be looking out for?
So maybe a question for me. I do think that one of the things that we had a conversation on the banking side is we still yet, when it comes to the scam side, we understand the warning signals. We just need to modernize them. We're still understanding, but on the actual understanding and detecting the trafficking centers themselves, I had a wonderful conversation late last week where we're still trying to figure out how we can identify these organizations that a lot of them are probably using formal financial institutions like Mina was talking about. They may have affiliated kind of organizations, lawyers, and as they've set up constructs to operate as an organization, as a company. And so we're still trying to figure out how to detect that, how we would detect that. I don't know that in the group I was talking to, we have any answers. I think that's something we need to look at is how do we detect the actual scam centers themselves and start identifying their financial transactions and start identifying them as entities. I do think it's something similar to the different beneficial ownership rules that are out there. How do we start understanding the relationships that these organizations have? I think one of the things that we also need to understand is as we look for things like money laundering, expand our view in unusual activity to include the possibilities of scam centers. I think a lot of our investigators need to at least become aware of this. The ones that are looking at unusual or suspicious activity need to understand this threat. And as they investigate, just because they don't find, for example, money laundering or fraud, it may actually be something else that is suspect and needs to be escalated to your various law enforcement agencies. So that's kind of where we landed now. I wish I had better information than that, but that's kind of where we landed. On the scam side, there's a lot of efforts underway to detect these type of scams. And I know a lot of organizations, including the Knoble, can assist on that.
Thank you. Claudia, if you would like to ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you all for your insights. It's incredibly insightful to see the extent of threat that technology poses to human trafficking. So really appreciate the examples and your scenarios. I'm curious to hear if there's any case studies of your experiences that you could share that relate to the recruitment of workers in specific sectors, maybe agriculture or others. Would be really nice to know what to look out for.
Yeah, so maybe I can share a bit about that. In terms of people who being kind of recruited to the scam center, so we see, let's put it that way, like for Chinese victims, which is lots of them, majority of them, Chinese victims tend to be male, because the Chinese law says that basically only females and children can be victims of human trafficking. But if it's a man, then it's almost no law for the basis. So lots of victims are male, and they may be from more kind of rural area, not necessarily from the city, but then they will at least know how to write and type and tech savvy, and that's one side. But for the kind of more international, so like outside China, lots of victims can be recruited, for example, first of all, like through fake job advertisements on LinkedIn or on like any kind of local job websites, but also could be kind of lured by their friends. Like for example, if somebody's already in the compound, they may be put into something called like a human resource department, which the criminals ask you to bring in more of your friends. If you don't do so, we beat you up. So some of the victims, they were recruited by their previous friends. And also the demographic can be a bit more mixed, can be male and female. So the age can be between as young as 14 years old, as old as like 40 plus. Lots of them, if it's from certain countries, for example, from Latin America, we witness a bit more like female, because maybe they're being brought into the compound, not necessarily to conduct scam, but to act as model, like to do the kind of video calls with the potential scam victims. So yeah, there's a little bit of kind of a trend, but in general, I think the message is anyone can be victims. As we, Valentina showed the map that we see victims from lots of Asian countries and more East Africa. There's also lots of from American continent. Personally, I have also met 2 American victims. So it can be anybody.
Thank you very much. And we just have time for one more question. So Eric Heinz in the chat commented, on the scam side, it will be important for law enforcement and the finance world to fight this as an overall trend and not a large number of one-off cases. Perhaps the panelists could just add a bit more on that.
Maybe I'll jump in there and just say, I love the comment there. We have great models of how law enforcement and financial institutions or the private world can work well together in Canada. There's a big effort right now with Homeland Security in the US. We have to, in the financial services and even outside, do a better job of enriching the information that law enforcement's getting. And law enforcement also needs to advance their use of analytics to source the unusual activity reports or suspicious activity reports they get out of the private sector. Homeland Security does that through an innovation lab. We have to modernize law enforcement also as we seek to work together and partner together and share better information and intelligence. There's a general, but I love the comment here. I do think success is going to be law enforcement working well with the private world, and we have examples of how that's working well so far across the world.
Yeah, I think the ideas of not treating this as a one-off case is really important. And actually, for example, what we understand about the kind of a system is that you have compounds which are already, dozens in many different countries. But each compound, you may also have like separate companies that conduct different types of scans. Some may be focusing more on linking scans, some may be focusing on Twitter, some may be focusing on different methods. So the idea is criminals between themselves, it's not necessarily just one whole homogeneous unit, but it's something that people all kind of wanting to do, different criminal groups can all jump in and have a share of their own like share. So in a way that it's really important to understand this is a trend, and the door is being opened, and more criminals may be potentially trying to use these methods. And it is indeed, something that not just one off, but we have to keep monitoring it and find ways to counter it.
Great, thank you so much. I think this has been a very fruitful discussion, and we could definitely extend another hour for sure easily, but unfortunately we're at the time now. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining, and thank you to our panelists. Unfortunately, Matt had to head to another event, but thank you, Ian and Mina, for joining today and sharing your expertise. So obviously this webinar has been arranged alongside the publication of the release of our new publication, authored by the Mekong Club in collaboration with the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative, the Knoble and Humanity Research Consultancy. The link will be shared in the chat and also sent to everyone who registered to this event along with the recording. So this publication offers a very comprehensive look at this crime. So obviously it's a very complex crime, and we need expertise and knowledge from both the financial and tech side, looking at the scams and the impact on online scams that this is having, but also we can't forget the human trafficking side and how this is actually fueling this and the vicious circle that this is creating. And this is part of a wide transnational criminal network that's operating with complete impunity. So rapid action is needed across the sector, as our panelists have made very clear today. So yes, the emails of our panelists have been put in the chat as well. So if anyone has any other questions that we weren't able to address today, feel free to reach out. And I hope everyone has enjoyed and can take a lot away from this session. Thank you all for joining.